On this episode of the Mothman in the Bible Belt podcast, legendary parapsychologist and author Dr. Barry E. Taff talks about his 53-year career investigating over 4,800 cases of ghosts, hauntings, and poltergeists. Unlike the ghost hunters on the Travel Channel, Dr. Taff investigates hauntings and poltergeist activity from a scientific perspective. We'll be talking about some of Dr. Taff's most infamous cases, alien abductions, and his 2010 book, Aliens Above, Ghosts Below.
Welcome to the Mothman in the Bible Belt podcast with your host, Buck Fantastic.
Girl Scout cookies.
For over 5 decades, Dr. Barry E. Taff has investigated the things that go bump in the night. While employed as a research associate at UCLA's famed parapsychology lab in the 1970s, Taff investigated Doris Bither's claims of spectral rape and unseen otherworldly physical assaults. The case was later fictionalized and the basis for the 1978 novel The Entity, written by Audrey Rose author Frank DiFelitta, and later turned into the 1983 movie of the same name, starring Barbara Hershey. Taff would go on to investigate the San Pedro Haunting and appear on numerous television shows and docs, including Sightings, The Otherside, Haunted History, Ghost Adventures, California's Most Haunted, and Zak Bagans Demon House. Many of you may have heard Dr. Taff on Art Bell's Coast to Coast radio show. During our interview, Dr. Taff dissects the Entity case, San Pedro Haunting, and the Hollymont Haunting. He discusses cases he's worked on involving alien abductions and nearly being strangled to death by a ghost in a haunted Inglewood, California home in the early 70s. Dr. Taff also gives his 2 cents on Ghost Adventures host and Demon House director Zak Bagans. As to Dr. Barry E. Taff's credentials, he holds a doctorate in psychophysiology with a minor in biomedical engineering from UCLA. From 1969 to 1978, Dr. Taff worked at UCLA's parapsychology lab and following its closure, struck out on his own as a paranormal investigator. Join me, your host, Buck Fantastic, for another exciting episode of the Mothman in the Bible Belt podcast. Dr. Taff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your background in parapsychology.
It began when I was very young, and I was having these recurring paranormal experiences, from being able to see what people are doing long way, many miles from me, to being able to hold objects and get impressions, psychometry. What do you do? I keep having them. My friends weren't having them, but I was. My family wasn't having them, but I was. I can do diagnoses on people from a paranormal perspective. And I didn't know that other people were able to do that. So at the age of 10, I was in grammar school, and it's recess, and this little blonde girl named Christine is walking towards me. And suddenly I could see that under her dress on the right side was a big plastic bag with something in it and a tube going into my body. I'm 10 years old. I didn't know what a colostomy was. I went up to her and asked what it was. She started screaming, yelling, and got the teacher. They dragged me in the principal's office, and he said, I may have to evict you for sneaking in the girl's bathroom or something, or looking under her dress. I said, I did neither. What do you mean? I just was able to see through it. And he went, what do you mean see through it? See through her clothes. It happens every so often. And he goes, all right, I'm going to call your mom. He calls my mom, and he said, explain to her what happened. My mother said to him, Barry can do that. The word medical intuitive didn't exist yet. I remember he said to my mother on the phone, you're as crazy as your son is. He hung up on her. And then he warned me, if it ever happens again, I'll have you evicted from school and taken to juvenile hall, and you'll spend the rest of your school days there. I said, it won't happen. But before I left the room, I looked at him and I said, you got that weird purple thing from like when your appendix was taken out, and it's always like inflamed or, and because he had that. It's not, I called it, I know what to call it now. I didn't know what to call it then. I'm 10 years old. And it was the scar of surgery. He had an appendectomy. He then turned certain colors on me, purple, blue, green, whatever. And he yelled, "Get out of here. If this ever happens again, you're going to be arrested." Well, it did happen again, but I was never foolish enough to mention it to anyone in school because I realized that most people don't know what this is. I read about a woman at UCLA, Dr. Thelma Moss, who had a parapsychology lab. And I wrote her and told her a little bit, wrote her a letter. There was no email back then. Wrote her a letter discussing what had happened, been going on with the beacon. She never responded. So a couple of weeks later, I left a message on the switchboard at UCLA for her at the office she had there. Didn't respond. I go, well, whatever. So more time goes by, and I'm in college. I met one of her graduate students, and I told him what was going on with me, and he set up a meeting with Dr. Moss in, I think it was April of 1969 at her home in Beverly Hills, which is so close to where my parents live, I could have walked. So I'll go to meet her. Other than the work she'd done in parapsychology, I knew nothing about her at all. So come in, opens the door. She's really nice, and around my parents' age. And she said, "Do you do psychometry? Will you hold objects and get impressions?" "Yeah, sure, I do it." So she gave me her keys, and I described some people and this and that and some names. And at one point, I remember I said to her, "I see a fat, blue-eyed blonde woman named Shelley always screaming all the time." And that was accurate, although an unflattering description of her friend, Shelley Winters, the actress. And so I came up with other names and things. And okay, so she was impressed. So they started to do a study on me at UCLA. It was published in a medical journal in 1974 and 5 about me as a psychic. Okay, so you're psychic. Well, why and how? And why is it happening to you and not your friend and family? And there is no relative answer for that because no one really knows what makes each person unique. So I started working in the lab, and I ended up doing two things. One was the lab work, and most of this is found on my website, barrytaff.net. And the work I was doing was, could I apply standard learning paradigms to parapsychology and help teach people how to increase their inherent psychic potential, whatever that is? And I said, well, the worst that could happen is nothing. The best, it'll work. And it worked better than I ever anticipated. And the article on my website is called Learned Psi, Training to be Psychic. And it goes into some detail on what we did and how we did it and what happened. And, it's one article, but some incredible things happened during those years. But we began to learn things that we didn't anticipate. And I should preface this statement with one. When I entered this field in 1969, working at UCLA, being studied, I assumed that what I would learn would simply reiterate or clarify what I already suspected. Well, that wasn't the case. Everything I expected to learn, I didn't, and things I never thought of ended up coming up. And the best way to describe this is this. Okay, let's say you're holding a DVD in your hand and you want to watch it. What do you need? Well, you need a DVD player. It's got to be hooked up to a TV. Both the player and the TV have to be plugged in the wall. You got to have a remote. And then you put the DVD, the information in the system, and you turn it on. You could watch whatever you want. It's on the video. So that's how that works. But if any part of the ensemble is missing, nothing shows up on your TV screen. And this is what seems to be going on in this area, in the sense that the work we were doing, I was doing in the lab. And even just when I think of it today, it's still striking. One example, well, I didn't know this at the time, but we were being visited by various members of the intelligence community, the CIA, the DOD, the DIA, NSA, or come, and they were participating. They were witnessing what we were doing. I remember one specific incident. The whole purpose of this was to put people in a sensory-deprived environment and allow them to speak upon what they're perceiving in their minds, where the only thing available to them were their own thoughts, not what's in the room or not what they're hearing outside or whatever. So this guy came in, he was a target. I didn't know the guy was. He was dressed like anyone else, very normal and very casual. So I remember we started describing a submarine being built called the Trident. It was an Ohio class sub, an SLBM, a sub-launched ballistic missile submarine. And I started describing a D-5 missile or something like that at great depth. And, no one knew this. It was the early 70s. And they were freaked out. And they corrected or commented on what we said after we did it. They took the control of the tape recorder and corrected us and gave us feedback, which is the whole essence of this. And they said, look, you'll have to surrender the tape. Why? Because it's got classified information on it. I said, okay, I don't care. You remember what you said? I said, barely. I just don't remember something, but nothing to the detail I described. It was too deep, too much. Okay, so they took it away. Big deal. So we ended up doing more demonstrations for the intelligence community and the military, and they were very impressed because it worked well. And they call it remote viewing now. Back then, we called it ESP. But here's what we discovered. Give an example. One girl came. She was another girl who was an assistant in the lab, a couple of years younger than me. And she was kind of wild and crazy, a lot of drugs. She was stoned most of the time, kind of a hippie. And Dr. Moss wanted her to come to my group. I said, okay. But I didn't want her there. Okay, anyway. But she shows up. I knew nothing about her other than that she was stoned all the time, and she was kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. So she shows up, and we told her what we do. I wanted her to think of someone she knows very, very well, very well. It could be friend, family member, brother, sister, whatever. And then we're going to lower the lights out, go through an altered state of consciousness, and then we're going to let people verbalize what they perceive to what your target name is. She said, okay. So lights are out. We're all quiet. We're saying things. And I remember at one point I saw something where I saw a large house, around beautiful foliage, like in a canyon or something, gorgeous. Most of the walls were glass, as opposed to whatever the wall's made of normally. And huge kitchen that was lined with empty jars of bako bits. Okay. So then we tried to get a name. We kept just trying to phonetically approach, describe, given the name. It wasn't coming out that well. Okay. Then we go from there to the fact that this guy had been viciously beaten or mugged. Okay, so the period, we stopped work. The girl who was the sender, for lack of a better term, took the remote control. And she said, okay. And she played it back. Yeah, we described his house. We described his name phonetically. It wasn't totally accurate, but it was close enough to where you'd go, that's strange. The kitchen was lined with empty jars of bako bits, that God knows why. But the thing about him being beaten and mugged, no, he'd never been beaten and mugged, so I don't know what you're talking about. So he was a little older than her, like probably in his 30s. And we didn't know that at the time. So, okay, that session ended. The next day, I'm up in the lab. And 2 days later, the girl calls. Oh, yeah, you remember what you did our group the other day? Yeah. Remember what you said about him being beaten and mugged? Yeah, well, at the time the group was being done, when we actually did the work, unbeknownst to her, of course, unbeknownst to us, this man was being viciously beaten and mugged up in San Francisco.
Wow. Was the CIA and the military funding you all's research?
No, they wanted to. They were very open about that. They wanted to fund us, but UCLA did not want to get into political bed with the paranormal, because it was already the head of the NPI, Dr. Jolene West, already had a rather unusual history of MK Ultra, orbital undercutting, psychosurgery. So he already had a lot of problems. He did need a bigger one. So when I filled out applications for them to work with us, UCLA said no, and the Neuropsychiatric Institute said no. So that never happened. But we still did little things for them, just to verify that what we did wasn't an accident. You know, they figured, well, something can happen once, but how often? So the groups kept going, and every so often, something would happen that was so extraordinary, it was beyond what I've already told you. So this girl came one night. I met her on a case I was investigating in the Valley, a poltergeist case. So we'll talk about her case later. And so she's in the room and lights, and suddenly this gigantic red ball of light comes flying out of her body in this
Are you
pitch
talking
black
about
room.
Judy?
No. This is a girl named Paula. And it flew across the room, and everyone jumped and whatever. And we turned the lights on. Judy was in a semi-fetal position in the chair, and she was shaking. And she never came back. She left and never returned. It kind of freaked her out. But speaking of Judy, I've been on, like I said, thousands of cases, not by 1977, but so part of my work in the field was to when people called and claimed they were having paranormal experiences like poltergeist activity or hauntings or apparitions or aliens. We'd go out and we'd talk with them and collect information, see if we could document what they're experiencing. So in this particular event, went to the case. This was on April 14th, February 14th, which is a Valentine's Day. And we went to this case in Los Angeles, right? It was near La Brea and Beverly Boulevard. I remember that. It was on the street called Detroit Street. So I'd already spoken with the woman a few times, named Judy. We showed up, walked in, and I saw what I thought was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my life, named Judy. She looked like a young, what's her name, Elizabeth Taylor, but with a little bit darker eyes. The nose, the cheekbones, the mouth, the chin, the height, the figure were identical to, Elizabeth Taylor. Anyway, so, there was not much going on in the case. We recorded some weird audio thing that disappeared. We never knew what that was. So, but anyway, she kept calling me. We ended up going out, started dating, and it was great. And then the dreams came. The dreams always seem to come where it's like a warning, like, stop, hey, be careful. There's, you're walking on very thin glass here. Okay, so the dreams were always the same. And all they told me was that it was July 22nd and something would happen that would end my relationship with Judy. And believe me, I didn't want it to end. Now, I didn't tell her about this because she would have thought I wanted to walk away and might have misinterpreted it. So I didn't tell her. But the dreams kept occurring over and over, always the same. So I didn't tell her about it. I tried to forget it. Now, we were staying once in her mother's condo in the Hollywood Hills. This is in 1977, in July. So I wake up, and it's a large bedroom. I wake up, and I'm going, and Judy's under the cover. She's crying. Why didn't you help me? With what? When the room lit up. What do you mean the room? When the room lit up, I don't know. She's still under the covers. Okay. So she said something picked her up from the bed and then moved her horizontally through the walls and then into something else. And she was in a round room, like made of metal, very bright metal, like stainless steel or brushed aluminum. There was a metal table, very cold, she was on. And they strapped her down in her neck, her wrists, her ankles, and her abdomen very tightly. And these little men, grayish, it looks like scaly skin, big black eyes, no ears, no nose. She could hear them saying that they're not going to hurt her. It'll just be a while. And she was trying to fight them, and it wasn't working. And then she found herself back in the bed. Now, remember, back in 1977, ufology was nowhere near as relevant as it is today, and even that is somewhat irrelevant for most people. So I finally coaxed her out from under the covers, and she had black and blue bruises around her neck, around her wrists, around her abdomen, and around her ankle, like she'd been held too tightly and fought the tension. And then evidence that been a little surgery on her. She was bleeding from an eye. She's bleeding from an ear. She's bleeding from a uterus, and she wasn't menstruating. Bleeding from a rectum. And it wasn't a lot, but it's enough, like, what the? And so I said to her, you know about UFO abductions? And she goes, what? What do you mean, what's a UFO abduction? She had no interest in the subject matter, none. So she lost it. Broke at her. There were no psychologists and psychiatrists that would even deal with this in terms of assisting people that are traumatized by it. So she had no interest in going to one anyway. Now, I was going down to my car later that day, and I saw one of the neighbors. I don't remember his name. I remember what he looks like, but it's not his name. And he said, "Did you see that big thing the other night?" I go, "What?" There was this big glowing thing over this area. It knocked out the power for 2 hours. Of course, the clocks were 2 hours out of phase. They were 2 hours had gone by. They didn't move. No, and the power went out. It's okay. Now, had this not happened, whatever it was, Judy and I would have been married, but that didn't happen. And she's a complete vegetable now. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
She thought it was Sai Baba, right?
Right. Yeah. She was a very beautiful girl, and she was very gifted. She came to our research group a lot. She's very good, but she got this rather unusual belief that all the phenomena was due to Sai Baba or God, and of course there's no evidence that occurred. So this is just one example of something like that. We've discovered that we've had a number of cases over the decades that seems to indicate that there's an odd linkage between paranormal phenomena and UFOs. And that in that UFOs may use the same energy we call paranormal, meaning it's not electromagnetic, that nuclear is gravitational, but it can affect all those other energies. And had this not occurred with Judy and I, we would have been married. My life would have been so different. I can't conceive of it. It's totally beyond me. But that didn't happen. Yeah.
So what's the protocol for investigating and researching a haunting?
Well, first you go out. We go out and we ask them a lot of questions. I have a very specific form I fill out in each case. That, name, address, phone number, what their age is, what kind of work they do, any medical history in terms of medical, pre-existing conditions that they're aware of, any historical elements in their families, such if they're seizure prone or epileptic, they take any over-the-counter medications or prescribed medications. If so, what dosage, what frequency? Do they take any, recreational drugs that are illegal? So all this I fill out. And if people won't answer my questions, I get up and leave, because unless we have answers, what's the point of helping them? We're trying to, because they're not going to tell us what's really going on. So, in fact, the form I fill out is 16 pages long.
Wow.
So it's a very lengthy page per case. And a lot of cases begin and end in that one time. I mean, we went to the house where I met Judy. We recorded some weird audio anomaly, but it's whatever, like someone was talking, but there was no one there, but it faded over time. But most of the time, it's the chance of encountering phenomena when you're on the field is the chance of witnessing a UFO land in your front yard in 5 minutes. It's extremely unlikely. There's so many variables. Okay. The bottom line with all this stuff, the field investigation thing, there is a somatic correlation to this that I've learned, which is so consistent, you could bet on it and you'd win every time. Okay. Now, it appears from the data I've collected and others have collected that the majority, if not all, of poltergeist agents, that recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, this is the macroscopic type that you can't control. The majority of those individuals are either seizure prone or epileptic. But at the same time, the majority of people who are epileptic or seizure prone are not poltergeist agents, which means there is a missing variable in there. And God only knows what that is. But
do the anesthesia drugs help?
Well, yeah. That's here's the latest story. I almost died in 2015. I won't bore everybody with that story. It's very upsetting to me, and I'm still having some fallout from it. But anyway, so I spent 2 years in the hospital. All these surgeries, which were horrible. But at least I survived, came out better than I was when I went in. I had to come into the hospital. I lived with a friend, moved into his home in Rancho Mirage. I knew him for about 25 years. Good friend. But I knew nothing about him other than I met his parents, one of his older brothers, and other than that, I knew nothing. So I move in. Within 5 days, phenomena starts in his house. I'm watching TV one night. I'm pretty sure it was an old episode of the original Star Trek series. And I'm in the house alone. My friend's out playing pool somewhere. And I hear a voice coming from my left, clearly hear it, a woman calling my name. And I jumped off the couch because I'm in the house alone. And no one came to the door, and the doors are all locked. So it kind of startled me, which made me jump because there was no one there. Over the next several months, disembodied voices, luminous anomalies, reports, machines turning on and off, things of that nature. And we couldn't predict, no way to know where or when it would happen next, but it kept happening. So we finally moved in November of 2017 to a bigger house because there was no reason to stay in the house that we were in. Moved to a new place in Palm Desert. Beautiful. Bigger rooms, better air conditioning, better silence against the world outside. And so it was great. So we're in there several months. Nothing happened. Oh, good. Nothing's happening here. And then it's about 6 months, things start occurring. Disembodied voices, luminous anomalies, rooms lighting up as if an old-fashioned light bulb was flashed, a flash cube used for photography. And it would pan. We couldn't control it. Yet my friend got a dog. The dog didn't seem to like what was going on. It was scared to death. We were in the kitchen once, and pots and pans on the stove that weren't even being used. They were just left there after they were cleaned, and they're about jumping around on their own. And the dog started to bark and then growl at what was happening. We saw some of it, but then it was gone. Now, okay, all these things happening. Why is this happening around me and my friend? So remember, I was in the kitchen one night, and he's in his office, I think, and he yelled at me, "Hey, Barry, I left some medication vials on the island in the kitchen. Can you bring them to me?" Sure, no problem. So I pick them up, and as I'm walking to his office in the house, I looked at the medications, and one of them, I don't remember the name of the medicine, but I remember what it was used for. It was an anticonvulsant. I said to him, "Why do you take this?" "Oh, I have these spasms in my legs and arms, and I can't control them, and if I don't take this, I can't sleep." I said, "You're seizure prone." He goes, "Yeah. You didn't tell me." Well, I didn't think it was important. Well, it is, and it was. So incredible events that transpired at the house. And the most stupendous were 2019. I wake up middle of the night, and there's someone in bed with me, but I went to sleep alone. So I'm in one end of the house. My friend's in another end of the house. We have bedrooms completely apart, from nowhere near each other. And I get up, and who's in bed? I look, can't see the face, but it's a woman, a little bigger than me, really long auburn hair, high brow ridge, thin nose, can't see the eyes. I can see the jaw, younger than me. And what the hell? I'm jumping. What? And I try to reach over the bed to the lamp on the nightstand next to the bed because I wanted to see what this was or who it was. And she said, "Don't do it. Don't turn the light on." I go, "What?" Just don't let it. I turn it on, and there was no one there. But there were real long strands of auburn hair on the bed. So I went, well, I don't know, really weird. And now, 2 years later, and 1 year later, I get contacted from a girl I used to live with in LA in 85 to 87 in Brentwood we lived. And she looked very much like Salma Hayek, very similar look back then. But she could have looked like they were sisters in many reasons. Anyway, so I talked to her. She didn't know I moved. She'd been trying to hunt me down, and she finally found me through a friend. So I said, "What made you contact me?" She said, "Well, I had a weird dream regarding you." When was it? Last year. When? Oh, August. What happened? Well, I was in bed with you. We were both laying there, and you moved and started frightening me. And I told you not to turn the light on.
Wow.
So what was that? Well, I didn't want to see her again. I saw the picture. She's 11 years old, 10 years old, younger than me, and she looks like she's 20 years older than me. She's aged very hard. She's done a lot of drugs. Anyway, so that was one of them. Sometime in 2019, I wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm coming out of it. I look to the right, it's to the side of the room, near where the desk is and the computer is, and I see these two forms standing there, two humanoids. and they were pulling something out of the underside of my right forearm. And I go, what the? And apparently my being awake freaked them. They jumped, they kind of bounced off each other, turned around, they were gone. So I get up, my arm was bleeding, not bad, it was bleeding. I had to put some pressure on it for a while. And the room stunk of hydrogen sulfide very badly.
Were these the Greys?
Yeah, well, yeah. And they're about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and they didn't say a word, but they reacted very intensely when I got up and moved, and they heard me or responded to my speaking. Okay,
Now, were these
well,
similar to the extraterrestrials that girl Terry that you wrote about in your book experienced?
with the girl, wait, the girl who? Which one is this?
Terry, who was a UCLA student. This was the
Oh, wait,
80s.
no, 87. It was, yeah. Yeah, that was similar. We got a call. I got a call from a woman. They lived up in Bel Air. It was Bel Air with her parents. She was in school, in college, early college. And I went out and interviewed her and her mother, and apparently no prior experience. Suddenly, she woke up one night and saw these beings in her room looking around. And she freaked out because they weren't human. Short, gray skin, black eye. The gray. They're wearing some kind of an outfit. And then when she started screaming, her mother came in the room because her father was out of town because he was busy working. Mother came in. The dog came in, started barking, growling at them, and the mother started screaming. And they touched what looks like something on their belt or midsection, and they lit up and were gone. That was the story. No proof of anything. She didn't have a camera. It was a long time ago, before digital technology. So, I told her, look, it's an isolated incident, which I assumed to be correct. It won't happen again. And then after the event, before I came out, there were poltergeist activity. Doors opening, closing, machines turning on and off, fires starting on their own, people talking, no one's there, knocking, scraping sounds on the walls. Okay, don't worry. So everyone was okay, but she was very on edge. Sometime later, it happened again. This time she woke up and they were pulling something out of her arm. I don't know what, like she was bleeding, and they jumped when they realized she was awake. And then she saw one of them. She had a large aquarium, but instead of having fish in it, she had snakes in it. God knows why, but each to their own. And then when she started yelling, and both her parents came in, the dog, they started yelling at them, and they lit up and were gone again. So, given this last event, she said she basically walked out of school, stopped school, packed her stuff up in her car, and disappeared. And I never heard from her again. So, these things happen. They happen all over the place, and you never know unless people come forward and are willing to talk to you about it. But
what distinguishes a haunting from a poltergeist?
Well, poltergeists are linked to people, which means they're an extension of the human psyche. And in my book, I talk about something called, biological operational amplifiers. Some people, like my old friend I used to live with, they're like they access energy and store it. And they're in the right set of conditions, they can release it and wreak havoc in environment. So poltergeists are supposedly, from what we know, part of the human psyche. It's a recurrent, spontaneous psychokinesis. Now, psychokinesis, there are several types of it. One type is the minuscule, mini scale or macro. No, not the minis, not the macroscopic. The macroscopic. The macroscopic is where things are thrown around, people, furniture, objects of considerable mass are moved, yet no heat produced. Nothing bursts into flame. The microscopic version is one that happened when you work with random event generators, number generators. You're able to consciously manipulate some mechanism that alters randomicity in an event. And fun, but when people have done that, they're exhausted. It's very tiresome and consumes a lot of energy for just the focus. The macroscopic just happens. No fatigue seen in the person at the middle of it. But what's interesting is that I'm wondering if it's all the same thing, and based on what's in the middle of it, we call it something else. In other words, but let's say you take, let's say, the most famous haunted location on Earth, wherever that may be, whatever country, I don't know, and you run 1,000 people through it who know nothing about what's going on there. I'd say 995 of them, nothing will have to go there. Yeah, nothing going on here. Couple, 4 or 5, they go, something happens. And they go like, what's going on? What the hell's happening? Things start moving. Something touches them. They feel something. Things react funny. Their machines start breaking down. They hear disembodied voices, luminous anomalies. The problem thing is, without those people being sensitive to it, inductive resonance coupling, this energy couples with our magnetic field. However, the forces at work in this phenomena are not electromagnetic, nor are they gravitational, nor are they nuclear. There's nothing left. There is nothing else known in human technology that can produce these incredible effects without heat reaction from them. When, let's say you're 6'2" and weigh 200 pounds, okay, take a human of that stature and pick them up and throw them across the room without any physical connection to them would require that energy. The energy required to do so would not only catch their clothes on fire, it would also set everything in the room on fire as well. But this does not occur. In fact, often the room gets colder to people's perception of it. So there's something in magnetic field that makes the hairs on our body stand up on end, and that gives the impression of cold, but it may not be cold. But again, what's the energies we know of in order to move the 6'2", 200-pound man flying across the room, like what happened to Jeff Wheatcroft more than once? That heat should have caused the entire room and everything in it start burning immediately, but it does not. So in physics, there are 2 types of energy. There's energy like normal thing, where it emits energy. That's an exomatic reaction. Then the other is endomatic. One takes it in, one puts it out. Everything we know in the world produces heat when it does work. Just moving your arm, moving your hand, moving your fingers, moving your eyes. Doing that will produce more energy than if you're standing still. Your heart rate goes up, there's more energy involved. Exothermic. The other is endothermic. And thus far, there's no explanation for how the forces we know could make things fly around the room on their own, especially people or heavy furniture.
You stated 95% of the cases you looked into where phenomena did occur, it was poltergeist in nature, and only 5% was around hauntings.
Right. Only had a few cases that I would say clearly are that of a haunting versus poltergeist, but there's so few far and in between. Take 1976. A guy comes in the lab named Mark. Didn't know who he was. He was a student at UCLA, and they was at a party at a house the night before up on a place called Hollymont Drive, which is in Hollywood. And so he told us what was going on. A kettle flew off the stove and dumped its water over someone's head in front of everybody. A weird black sheet or something appeared around the chandelier in the foyer. When light went out, half a second later it comes on. Oh, look, there is something that wasn't there a moment ago. Where did it come from and how did it get there? The case is interesting because we now know the address is 6221 Hollymont. It's right near the intersection of Hollymont and Argyle. And 2 active earthquake faults meet almost directly under the house. And there's a shallow river. So there you have energy. River water, moving water creates a magnetic field. Okay? Earthquake faults produce energy when they're even fairly very moving. He has electric effects. So we have this incredible case, and went out there to the house in 1976, and incredible story. It's on my website. It's the article. The Hollymont haunting, as good as it gets, and it doesn't get any better than that. Objects flying around, chasing people, books flying at people. I got to live there for a week in the summer of 1976 with one of my colleagues, and I went to make a glass of iced tea. I make it. I went back to the fridge to squeeze some lemon into it. I turned back, the glass is gone. It had gone through two doors that I had just locked. I was the only one in the house. And here we are, decades later, and I don't know who lives in there now. The house was in really bad shape. There's a lot of water erosion, a lot of damage. There were recurring fires breaking out in the upstairs bathroom. We took some pictures in the shower. We were there back in 2008. Yeah, it was amazing because there was nothing there but the shower stall, and yet this beautiful rainbow of light appeared on it, which it shouldn't have done. And the best part was, so we were there in 2008, running around the house trying to take measurements, and nothing was really going on at that point. It was pretty quiet. So then, towards the end of the evening, another friend of mine, Lori Jacobson, she wrote a book called Hollywood Haunted, and which she discussed in the Hollymont case. So I invited her. She got there a little later than the rest of us, and she got there. Things started happening. Nothing dramatic. Barry Conrad was working with me, and he recorded a strange red ball of light flying at the camera that shouldn't have been there. But the weirdest part was, we're getting ready to leave hours later. I picked up my Pelican case and noticed that something had been carved into the bottom of it. Now, for those of you who don't know what Pelican cases are, they're probably one of the best mechanisms for transporting anything over distance. They're heat resistant, they're water resistant, very sturdy, rugged cases. So I picked up thinking, what's this? Someone had carved a backwards R, a lazy R, into the bottom of the case. Now, you would have needed a hammer and a chisel. We would have heard that. We did not hear it because it wasn't there when we got there. Now, what's interesting, we know from long ago, the neighbor was renovating his home, leaning against a built-in shelf in the library that turned inwards like a secret passageway, and it found steps going down that linked it to a pathway that was below the homes where they used to run alcohol during Prohibition. They're walking in there, and they find a grave from 1922 with the name Regina on it, headstone. And then they didn't call the police or anyone, didn't do anything. It's been washed away by now because a lot of the river running under there has gotten more intense. But if a reason they have a headstone there is that somebody was illegally buried there. So, the house has been renovated. I don't know who's living in it now. But when I was there last in 2008, aside from what I've said, the owners at the time, really nice man, let us come in the house and do our work. And he said that light bulbs in the house kept exploding for no apparent reason. Okay? And different lamps, you get new lamps. And so the house has been totally renovated since we were there. When we were there originally in 76, my colleague and I were standing in the pantry, the large pantry, like a big walk-in closet. And we're standing in there, coins start falling and hitting us in our head. Thousands of pennies were falling from the ceiling from nowhere and filled the floor up to maybe an inch or two full of coins.
Doesn't that happen with poltergeists?
Yeah, exactly. But the question is, this is, you draw the line. Where do you assume the one is gone, the other begins? How much of a difference is? And so from what we've learned, there were two sides, supposedly, there were two suicides and a murder in the main house. And there was also a murder, I think, in a house to the east of it, which is where Dexter Gray lives. I don't know if he's still there. But the case is extraordinary because almost every time I was there, which were many times, it was active. When we were there in 76, it was a journalist from Fox News named Connie Fox, and she freaked out because things were flying at her in the kitchen, the pantry, and a sack of napkins, a tray of ice, And she ran out of the house. And as she ran down the Z-shaped stairwell, a book flew over the top of the building, swapping its pages, and made 1, 2, 3 turns and dropped right behind her. And she started screaming, and she never came back. And the street lamp right in front of the house back then kept blinking on and off for no apparent reason during the day, not at night.
In your book, you wrote about the Inglewood haunted house in the early 70s in Hyde Park, where a grandson, Dwayne, brought you in to try to get rid of his dead grandparents.
Yeah.
Dwayne transformed into his grandpa and tried to kill you.
Yeah, luckily there were witnesses to this. It wasn't just me making these. What happened was the 2 people that lived in the house, a couple, Dampu and Refugio, they were their names. I'll never forget those names as long as I live. And so we're in there walking around, and not much is happening. And the place had a weird feeling. It looked like the place had been abandoned for a long time, which it was. And and they would say the neighbors kept seeing the owners taking out the garbage and doing the lawn, even though they'd been dead for some time. The neighbors didn't know it. They were killed in a car accident. The question is, it called out, and not much is going on. We're there, and we come back, and we thought, well, we can't just sit here and wait for something to happen. Let's see if we could make something happen. Okay, so we're in this central area of the house that connects the bedrooms to the dining room and the kitchen. It's an interesting layout, actually kind of nice. And so we're there, we're trying to do a seance, for lack of a better description, and nothing's happening, nothing. Okay. So we stopped, and the power went out in the house, so we had to use candles. So we're there, nothing's happening. And then walking in the other room, and suddenly there's a man standing there I'd never seen before. Tall, about 6'1", 6'2", kind of husky, grayish, salt pepper hair, muscular, and he lunges at me and starts choking me and pulls me back to the bathroom and starts trying to kill me, choke me. And then the guys were coming, they were beating him off me, and they did beat him off me. And then as he fell to the floor in the bathroom, the image of this elderly man faded away, and there was the man who brought us to the house, who had no idea as to what happened, but he suffered the bruises of these guys beating him. So we told him what we saw, and he was, what? And he pulled out pictures of his grandfather, and that was exactly the man we saw attack me. However, the men saw the man attack me. The women saw the grandson attack me, which makes no sense.
Is that place?
It depends on who you. I don't know, unless we're called out. I do know that over the decades, white families have lived there, Asian families, Hispanic families, and they've all pretty much independently of each other experienced similar things, of things moving around, luminous anomalies, disembodied voices, and we were there a long, long time ago. So that was a great case.
When it comes to hauntings, can you successfully clean the house of a spirit, or are you screwed?
If we don't know what it is, how do you get rid of something if we don't know what it is? I mean, it'd be like, if you don't know what brakes on a car were and how to use them, how do you stop the car that's moving? You can't, because you don't know what to do. You're yelling at it, but if you don't know the brake. So if we can't, our job, first of all, is to objectify and to try to document the best we can what's going on. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, if we're lucky and we're there at the right place and the right time under the right conditions, something may occur, we'd be able to document what transpired. But that's the exception to the rule. I mean, 99% of the time you're here to talk to the people, you interview them. However, this is interesting. The instruments I bring out are relatively expensive, with the geomagnetometer and what's the other thing? And a zero gas chamber. It costs about $1,200 or more. And it's really a nice piece of technology because it allows you to measure the Earth's magnetic field. Okay. Another bring out is a low frequency spectrum analyzer. It can do many things. But what's interesting, measuring a person's electric field of their body is easy with the normal technology. You know, there's better versions, they're cheaper, but it's easy to do because it's a relatively robust field of energy. Measuring human biomagnetic field or biomagnetic field is a whole different matter. It's dramatically weaker than the electric field, and you'd need a superconducting technology like a squid sensor in order to measure it. And there's no such thing as a portable squid sensor. So our instruments will not record magnetic fields. However, if you're with a poltergeist agent, the instruments we have will record their magnetic field because their body is pumping out thousands of times the magnetic field of a normal person. And then you wonder why they're so wired or hyper. So the thing is, it's real, it's dramatic, and we can measure some of it. We don't understand. You know, it's like, again, if you have a 6-foot tall man weighing 200 pounds, it's picked up and thrown across the room like what happened to Jeff Wheatcraft in the San Pedro case. There's no known form of energy, even speculative, theoretical energy, that could make such a thing happen.
With the Inglewood haunted house case, since researching that, have you encountered any other type of situations where a spirit may have influenced or possessed someone?
Not to my knowledge, no. I worked with Zak Bagans on a case at this goat demon house in early 2015, and the man lied his ass off. Most everything he depicted did not happen that way. He edited out almost everything I said, and he claims that something possessed him, was trying to get him to kill me. Could have fooled me. So, you know, he makes shows to get publicity, and that's all he cares about. But after I saw the video, I contacted him. I said, I really like to talk to you about this. And he never returned the call. And he changed his phone number and his email address. So it was, I was expecting to stay in that area for maybe a week and take measurements of the environment, but it was freezing. The snow was 3 feet high. It was horrible. It was very cold. And, you know, it's whatever it is, it is. Or, you know, he calls it this, I call it that. Without being able to interview the people that grew up there or lived there, there's nothing I can do, you know. And he had the place torn down, but, you know, who knows? I'm really skeptical when people make these ridiculous claims that can't be proved or disproved.
That's about just about every show on the Travel Channel nowadays.
Yeah, the problem is paranormal reality shows follow a very specific formula. I discuss this on my website. I think there's one of my articles. It called I talk about the fraudulent nature of paranormal reality shows, and I said if you're let me make this more specific here. Then, before there were paranormal reality shows, I was contacted by a producer for one of the first shows, and so I didn't know him. I meet with the guy. He had an office very close to me in West Los Angeles. So I said, well, what are you going to do? Most of the time, nothing happens. Yeah, I know that. But what are you going to do? Oh, we'll fake it. And then when something does happen, we'll make it look like a hoax. I'm going, oh, nice seeing you. He goes, what? You want to do it? I said, what home and car are you buying me? No, I'm not going to do it. We approached one of my colleagues, Barry Conrad. Barry wouldn't do it either. And then Barry worked for him on some other shows, and he robbed Barry blind. The contract he had, and I don't know if it was settled out of court, but the guy was kind of a sleaze. And I said, look, you're not going to get me to lie to the public after decades of trying to do the right thing. And that was that. And, you know, I've been on, they did recreations of various cases over the years on different shows. And they spend more time on recreating the ghoulish, morbid murdering than on the case. It's all the TV cares about. Who's murdered? How much blood is there? Who was slaughtered? When did it happen? You know, the bottom line is, you know, we don't know any more now than we did about some of these things, but we know enough. We can almost predict what we're going to find, and it's pretty close. Like I said, a case in, I think it was 2008 or 9, my colleague Barry Conrad and I, on a case in Pomona, I think it was, or somewhere out there. So the couple moved in with the kid, and strange things started happening. Heard voices, lights flying around. Weren't able to record it, but it was freaking them out. So her husband suddenly, for no apparent reason, tries to kill her. And he was arrested and put in, evaluated. He didn't know what happened. Okay. They seem to get along before that. So they put him back in the home. Everything's okay. And sometime later, he's in the dining room, and he suddenly pulls out again and blows his head off right by the table. And it's only then that the woman his wife realized that that's how the original man who built the house died. Shot himself in the head on the table. Okay, bad enough. So she's telling me this and discussing things with her. And I said, and then the last thing she tells me before we leave, she said, well, tell me, Dr. Taff, she says, is it relevant that I suddenly became epileptic? Extremely. So, it's the same thing. This is where the faces may change, the places may change, but the phenomena does not. If I had the means to run some medical workups on Jackie Hernandez from the San Pedro case, might have found that she was either seizure prone or epileptic. A lot of people can be either and never get kindled to the point of phenomena before. They never get kindled to the point of having a seizure, but they may be epileptic a good part of their life.
With the San Pedro case, that was kind of complex because whatever Jackie had, it followed, or I guess transmitted something to Jeff Wheatcraft and Barry Conrad. They were experiencing poltergeist activity.
Mm-hmm.
Did that ever end, or has it gotten?
Well, here's what happened. Okay, I was contacted by a friend of Jackie named Susan, and Jackie we're worried that we would think she was crazy. So she talked to us a couple times. We went out there, myself, Barry Conrad, Jeff Wheatcraft, a few other people, and we listened to her story. And to be honest, I was very skeptical because she was kind of wired and fragmented, Jackie. Like she was about to explode, but she was in a bad place in terms of her marriage and the kids and having to take care of her kids and the whole bit alone. And so we're listening to her story. And at one point, some weird viscous liquid was coming out of the shelves, like through the wood. And we had it analyzed, and it was human blood plasma. So what is that coming out of the wood? Why is that material, that substance coming out of the wood? We don't know. And then we started hearing banging in the attic. And we go up there, and there's really nothing. Very dark and very tiny, even for someone like me. So eventually, as the case evolved, Barry goes up there with Jeff and Jeff goes up there by himself. And the first time, something pulls his camera out of his hands, and it separates the lens from the body, and they find the lens and body on the opposite ends of the attic, and they weren't broken. So, and then sometime later, and we were there another time, Jeff goes out there when Barry was there, and they hear like, oh! And another guy helping Barry was Gary Bain. Thank God he was in the attic. He turns, he couldn't see, it was too dark. He fired the camera's flash, and he saw Jeff had something wrapped around his neck and was pulling him up over one of the bolts in the rafter. So had Gary Bain not been there, Jeff probably would have died of strangulation. But that didn't happen, thank God. And so what's interesting about the case, there's two levels. One is Barry was very attracted, Jackie was very attracted to Barry Conrad, which is the norm. Barry always reminded me of a young, thin Elvis. Dark hair, blue eyes, tall. Everyone liked him. Rose always went nuts over him. And Jackie looked at Jeff as an impediment to her growing closer to Barry. Because every time we were there, Jeff was there with us. Except a few times when my father almost died and I had to help my mother. So wasn't around for a little bit of time. But anyway, so Jackie started to hate Jeff. And who does the phenomena keep attacking? Jeff. I was on a show with her back, in the 90s. I forgot which one it was. And I told the producer what I think was going on. So the producer said to me, wait, so you mean tell me that Jackie's telling the ghost what to do and the ghost is doing it? I go, there's no ghost. It's Jackie. And she went, what? Okay. So then, finally, Jackie's able to move. When we were in the house, our equipment would turn off for no apparent reason, turn on again. Um, Very odd thing. So Jackie moves up to Weldon, hundreds of miles north from San Pedro. And Barry and Jeff follow her up there. I couldn't because I was helping my mother with my father's heart attack. So they go up there, and things start moving around again, and strange electrical things happen. And at one point, they're sitting at a table trying to do a seance again. And Jeff is picked up. The chair drops from beneath him. He flies up into the wall and hits it where it meets the ceiling, and he hits the floor, and he's unconscious. And everyone thought he was dead. Thankfully, he was not. Okay, so that all happened. And then, in the meantime, the little shack that Jackie lived in on 11th Street, San Pedro, we thought, well, nothing will happen there. Wrong. New occupants who knew nothing about what happened with Jackie, knew nothing about it. They began experiences, everyone having experiences similar to Jackie's. But the phenomenon was still happening around Jackie. So it's almost like a contagion. In my book, I call it a psychovirus, for lack of a better term, that Jackie was susceptible to this. Her magnetic makeup was such that her body could incorporate this energy, and it worked with her to help enable itself when she was there. She moved, and because she was still charged up by this, it kept happening. Over time, it stopped because it bled off. The equivalent would be, okay, like I said, you're healthy with your friends and family where you're living, and you go to visit some friends, got to pick up something to help them with, and you don't see their kids or back in the house, but they're really sick. You don't touch anything, you don't breathe, you're wearing a mask. You come home, you get sick, you give it to your family. We know what that is. It's a vectored pathogen. This is very likely the same thing, but it's not biologic. It's energy of a type we do not understand.
But there is no haunting at Jackie Hernandez's old home?
All I can say is the environment there, if we had had the instruments we have now, would have been interesting to take measurements and be willing to bet that would have a pretty high amplitude magnetic field that's in flux, meaning the amplitude and frequency keep shifting because what our bodies react to is change. So high or low amplitude frequency. So anything that changes, our body doesn't like. And, it's a well-known belief or thought that when you start remodeling haunted houses, that phenomena goes crazy. And people, well, the ghosts don't like the change. Well, it may be a lot more grounded and scientific than that. When you remodel a place, you're moving around the conductors, things that transmit or hold energy, and then things that do not. So either it's a conductor or dielectric, where it won't transmit or hold the fields. So as you're moving these around, the relationship of the house to you changes. And it might simply be that we're, like in the entity case, I know you'd want to discuss it, but the woman first before we met her, she lived in Santa Monica. Things were happening there and increasing. She moved from there to Culver City. We met her without going into detail. It's in my book called The Real Entity Case. And all this stuff went on, and we witnessed a lot of it. And she was so evasive and cryptic. She wouldn't answer a lot of the questions I asked of her. And nowadays, when people do that, they refuse to describe what's going on or answer my questions, I get up and I leave, because what's the point? We can't do anything if they won't tell us what's happening, especially about themselves. So, we learned something over time, and the question is, what are we going to do with it? But we know more now than we've ever known, ever. And a lot of it's very substantial, because if you had told me 53 years ago that a big link to all this is a person who's epileptic or seizure prone, I go, yeah, right. Well, that's part of it.
Weren't neurologists talking about these things?
Well, because a lot of people don't ask the right questions. It's better that people, there was this, I won't give his name, up near Seattle. He's a PhD and an MD, very, very intelligent man. And he said to me years ago, well, no one's ever told me they were epileptic or seizure prone. I go, did you ask? He said, no. Why don't you get hold of people and ask? He did. They were all epileptic or seizure prone. What a surprise. So if you don't know what to ask for, you're not going to get any answers. So not only do you have to pay attention to what they say, but how they say it. And it's like doing, when your doctors are evaluating a new patient, they look at the evidence they collected from their previous physician and, blood work that was done, imaging that was done, whatever. But if the people won't cooperate with you, it's not good. And Doris Bither, the entity case, was about as uncooperative she could. She wouldn't tell us what her age was. I knew she was older than me, but I did not know by how much. She was probably 10 years old. Big deal. But she wouldn't give us her age. And every time, she drank a lot. We know that. But from what we know, alcohol was no more, no less a mediator or modulator in this stuff than anything else. If she did smoke weed, I don't know. But she had a dysfunctional relationship with her 3 male children. And as I wrote about in my book and other articles, they had to make a bet. What happened in that case was she had a strong libidinous fantasies, and what was happening to her was real. It was paranormal, but it was an extension of her.
But she created lime green lights that would bounce from the wall, and they formed into an apparition.
Yeah, one point we were in the bedroom, and which was sealed. Okay, we began to see strange luminous anomalies. So we sealed the house off from all external lighting. So the ceilings and the windows were completely closed off, and we were seeing these lights appear in the room, and these lights, always lime green, zipping around like something from a cheap sci-fi movie. And so then things began. At one point, we got one photograph. It looks like a comet with a tail on it. It's in my book. And before we got the pictures of the arcs over her, we had to make sure that this wasn't coming from some external source, that we weren't being manipulated or lied to. This wasn't a hoax. We did the best we could do. But what we saw at one point, which you'll see, okay, most of what we saw we couldn't photograph. Most of what we photographed we never saw. And what's so incredible about this is that in the picture of Doris sitting on her little bed and kind of cowering under her, we saw light zipping around her. We did not see a light forming an arc over her. What I think happened was it was a time exposure. It was set too long. The shutter speed was too slow. And beside that one, if you look, it forms a perfect arc over her. And behind it, the 2 walls meet at a perpendicular angle, 90 degrees, which means that if there was something projected against the wall, like a hoax or a scam, it would be bent in accordance with the wall. It was not. This was free floating in space. And then there's another picture where there's 2 arcs. One going top to top, then it going bottom to bottom, and they're in 90-degree angles to each other. We never saw this. And yet, there was an article published earlier this year in the Skeptical Inquirer, where the pinheads claimed that we faked the case. Yeah, right. If I wanted to fake a case, they were a lot better than that. But the point of it is,
some witnesses, right, from the UCLA.
There were a lot of people there. But what's more impressive was when the case occurred in 74, 75, the people that wrote the article were either babies or they weren't even born yet. But they know what happened, even though they weren't there. They want them to come on their blog or their podcast. I said, I don't want to waste my time. I said, I'd rather watch paint peel than deal with you people. You weren't there. You don't know what happened. You didn't see anything. So who cares what your opinion is? And I said, they showed a hair follicle floating in the air in front of a lens that did not resemble the arc framing Doris Bither. So, there's always going to be skeptics and debunkers. And, it's the nature of it. But also, a fuse box was torn out of the wall and thrown at Doris. And we got a call for once at 1 a.m. We had to go back there. We had put black poster boards covering her walls and ceiling, because the picture we got, we couldn't tell from where the photo light was coming from or going to. We couldn't tell its speed. We had no reference. So every board had a number on it and a magnetic orientation, thinking we could set up a grid and we could determine where something was going and coming from. And at one point, we're in the house, and one of the black poster boards on the ceiling tears itself loose from the duct tape, and it flew at Doris and hit her in the head. It wasn't her, it's the poster boards, nothing. It happened again. Carrie, my colleague, asked, it happened again. Another time, we're standing there, we're seated watching these lights coalesce in the corner of the bedroom, and we see a large apparition form, about well over 6 feet, kind of stocky. You could see the head, the brow ridge, the jaw, the neck, the upper torso, and it seemed to cut off at about the waist, and it was articulated. It wasn't frozen. It was moving. And we could not photograph what we saw. What we photographed, we never saw. What we saw, we couldn't photograph, which makes no sense.
Do you regularly see apparitions when you go on?
What?
Do you regularly see apparitions when you go to investigate hauntings and poltergeists?
The only trying to think apparition. The two cases. Let's see. One case was, or I think apparition. The one case that stood out was really in the case I been investigating in 2017 to 2021, and I lived with a friend because we had apparitions there. But I've seen the entity we saw was an apparition, except it wasn't perfectly formed. So the most of the time you hear stories, and that's the end of it. I was house sitting for a friend in the late 80s. He was going on a second honeymoon with his new wife and wanted me to take care of the dogs and everything. Okay. The real reason he invited me to stay there was the house was haunted. It's in Studio City, a beautiful home. And I'm in there, and I come there the first night. I put my my duffel bag on the bed, which has clothes in it and stuff I need, when I take a shower or whatever. And I go in the kitchen to get something to drink. And I come back to the bedroom, and the duffel bag is now on the floor across the room. Oh, I must have put it in a weird angle. It must have fallen. I put it back in the bed. I go back to my car for a while, come back, duffel bag's off the thing on the floor again. Well, what the hell is this? I don't know. Okay, so pretty quiet, beautiful home, nice big backyard with a large pool, which is great. And I think the second night, third night I was there, something wakes me up. Like it was summer, about 7 a.m, and I look. What? The room had glass walls again, so light comes up and it wakes you up. And so I'm sleeping, and I go, "What's this?" And, oh God! So I try to go back to sleep. There's nothing you can pull down over the windows. They liked it like that. So anyway, I'm trying to fall asleep, and suddenly I feel the bed sheets behind me get up, and I feel something roll against me into the bed, and it's a female object. It's female. I could feel the hair. I could feel the breasts. And what the hell is this? I see an arm coming around me. Whoa! And I jumped, and there was nothing there. So, that I saw the arm. I didn't see the whole body. But while I was there, got some weird photos in the bathroom. I heard this weird noise, and went to the bathroom. I saw these lights hovering in the air, and they were first vertical, then they were horizontal, and then they were gone. They zipped over my head as I left the house. And turned out the marriage didn't last long. And the house cleaner that used to work there, she wouldn't come there because she got sick of the stuff going on. It was scaring the hell out of her.
In your book, you mentioned Doris Bither's boyfriend saw an apparition on top of her, raping her before you all even entered the picture.
Correct.
Was that coming from Doris or from the boyfriend himself?
We never met. We didn't meet any of her boyfriends. It was coming from Doris. So the problem is, all we have to rely on was Doris and her 3 male children, who really didn't want us there because they were too busy watching TV or playing music. It's only one person's story. You can't prove or disprove it without talking to the subject of the event, which is her. But Doris went through men like most people would swim through water. one guy after another. Each one of her children came from a different man. She was a very troubled lady. She was disinherited by her family. They got sick of her behavior, and she was like a free roaming thing. It wasn't the most. We would not have put her on TV because she wouldn't have made a good witness, other than describing what happened to her. But without verification, I mean, the kids did see something. One of her boys did say to us that he went, like in the movie, he went into the bedroom and saw this thing on top of her, and he went to help her to get her off her, and it was shocked him and threw him back. Can we prove it? No, we weren't there. That was before we ever met her or the kids. But as I said, I had to make a bet. The case was a poltergeist case. It wasn't a haunting. And I don't know if the house is still haunted because I'm sure different people live there now. The house has been renovated, looks much better from the outside.
But when she moved after the Culver City, after living in Culver City, people on both sides of her were experiencing the poltergeist phenomenon.
When she moved from Culver City to Carson, people on the east side of her who knew nothing about her prior experiences, which she learned not to discuss, they began having poltergeist activity, even though they knew nothing about her, shortly after she moved in. So, it's something, it's her. And then she moved again to San Bernardino or Riverside or something like that. And supposedly it followed her there. Machines turning on and off, faucets turning on and off, weird sounds, people talking. And, and then she passed away in 1999. I think it was 1997, one of those 2 years. And the cause of death was listed on her autopsy as, what was it? Cardiopulmonary arrest. But why? We don't know. She stopped. Her heart stopped and her lungs stopped. Why? We don't know. She wasn't that old. But who knows? If it's maybe all this stuff happening and being an extension from her or troubled psyche was enough to cause her body, tremendous amount of physical harm. We don't know.
I read that James Wan is interested in remaking The Entity.
Oh, yeah.
Are you concerned?
No. He's been saying that for 8 years. I think it was a publicity stunt. And if he were to remake it, it would be a cheap horror movie that had no resemblance to the real case. Remember, Frank D. Fellita's novel, The Entity, was not a documentary book.
It was a book of fiction.
It was a novel, right? So you take it 85% fiction, the rest is real. So James Wan, years ago was going to do it, and he never did it. But people talk about it. Oh, other people were going to do it, they didn't do it. What apparently there's a lot of negative impact about this case. When it was being in development, before they cast Ron Silver and what's her face, the girl that played Doris,
Barbara Hershey.
They really wanted to be in the movie. They really pushed at it, and they were given the chance to do it. Barbara Hershey gave a good performance. Ron Silver was good. He was the only of the entire cast member. He was the only one that was a pleasure speaking to. Barbara, I'm a star, right? Yeah, okay, forget it. And then after the movie came out, it got a lot of negative publicity because it was looked at as very misogynistic and the whole bit. So, Barbara said it was the biggest mistake of her life to be in that film. Yeah, right. And same thing with Ron. So, yeah, okay. So, and nowadays, I don't know if they would make such a film because the whole thing about women being raped is just so the Me Too stuff, it's a little too dangerous.
Extreme.
And you can, like I said, I don't for 1 second believe that Doris was raped by a ghost. I mean, there's just, in science, see, there are two ways in science. You don't explain one phenomenon with another. And also, if you run out of explanations, don't jump at the most outrageous, something called Occam's razor. You always go with the simplest explanation first, unless you find something more objectively verifiable and more compelling that's physical evidence. Otherwise, so that case will probably never go anywhere. It's what it was, and the director hated Carrie and I. He couldn't stand us.
Do you keep in touch with Carrie Gaynor?
And so often we communicate, but not much.
Does he still
Long
do
time ago.
parapsychology work? I know he does the smoking cessation
Yeah, right,
hypnotherapy
right.
now.
I don't believe. I don't know. I really don't know. No, long time ago.
After 50
Long
years
time
of
ago.
research, do you think consciousness survives death?
Yes, but are not in a fathom we can comprehend right now. It the same way you can't create or destroy energy. It might be simple as that. It's energy of a type we don't understand. It exists before birth. It continues after our physical death. But what does that mean? God only knows. I don't know. But
Besides,
the things we've learned are extraordinary, and they're objectively verifiable, which is even more important. So,
besides high ions, elevated magnetic fields, and various drugs impacting the mind, what
yeah.
other earthly phenomena has been linked to ghostly phenomena?
Well, the only thing is, like, I'm sure the weather may have a lot to do with it. High levels of ionization, maybe an electrical storm before earthquakes. Where the energy house sits is between two active fault lines in Culver City, and there's a high piezoelectric content in that area, so that could account for it. But that's not what was causing it. In other words, if phenomena needs energy to do what it does, it must draw upon something. The question is what and how.
So, are you
So,
still actively researching? Um,
not six. I almost died. I was the case that I lived through when I lived with my friend in Rancho Mirage and Palm Desert. I collected a lot of data. I've written it up. It'll be in another book, but I'm not anxious to do anything right now because I'm still in a kind of a hectic situation in terms of my life. So I got to get that resolved first.
a few years ago, you wound up homeless, correct?
I still am. I'm still. I mean, I'm living place. I was living with my friend for almost 4 years. And then we got evicted because he was having consistent arguments with the owner of the house. They liked me, but they didn't like my friend. So he was argumentative and confrontational. I'm not. And so we threw us out. So we lived in hotels, and he lives in his car. And I lived in a couple of hotels, some expensive, some less expensive. And the local government's been supporting me at this hotel since last summer. So I don't know what's going to happen. That's going to end. So I have no idea where I'm going to go or how I'm going to go. So I don't know.
Is housing outrageous, as they say in California?
Yeah, I mean, rents are ridiculous, and rental, and if you want to buy something, everything's overpriced. Rentals are over. I mean, it's just everything just keeps going up as the cost of living goes up, the cost of gas, the cost of food goes up. They raise the rent. They raise the rent. They raise the rent. So luckily, I've been in a safe place since last summer, since July of last summer, and I'm in just another hotel 1 block away. So it's been okay. I've been able to get food, medication. At this point, that's all that matters. When I'm back in a city again with my instruments, I can do research, but not out here. All my stuff's in storage in my friend's house.
In your book, you advise against seances. Do seances work or at making contact
Well,
with the dead or
it's it's like people say they want to use a Ouija board, and I always say, would you let a living person take your hand and write with the pen in your hand? No. Then why let a dead person do it? Even though I don't believe that's what's happening. It's just it taps an element of the subconscious or unconscious, and all types of weird things that come out of it. Some of which aren't that effective for helping people's lives. So unless you want to create more conflict in your life, more disorder, more chaos, I wouldn't do it. You're not going to get anything. You're not going to be able to bet and win the lottery all the time, or it just doesn't work that way.
in your book, you wrote about an incident in Cambodia regarding U.S. military going at it
Right,
with extraterrestrials with a knack for human body parts.
right. It was in Cambodia. It was like 1973 or two, and we weren't even supposed to be in Cambodia, but we were there, and our GIs came upon humanoids taking human body parts and throwing them into a bin. So we opened fire on them, and we hit their body with bullets, M16 bullets. Nothing would happen. We already killed them. Would have to fire a headshot. So there was a firefight, and we killed some of them. and they returned fire with some kind of small directed energy weapon and killed a number of GIs. They finished loading the bin and they took off. And this is from the work of the late Leonard Stringfield. Look him up online. He's published a lot of interesting articles and monographs and books dealing with UFO crash retrievals. Great researcher. Passed away not that long ago. And that's where I reference the information from. So,
you also wrote about the possibility that aliens a million or so years ago may have helped populate and hybridize the planet, because you wrote something about Status Report 3 about a pathologist autopsying an alien and seeing Cro-Magnon man features.
Right. The evidence suggests that we, meaning the human race, may be the result of another advanced race coming to the Earth before humans existed, and they basically played God with the proto-humans that were here. And gee, look, suddenly their brains are larger, they can think better, they can use tools better, and here we are. And if that's true, and I believe it is in part, it would be the most destructive information ever to give society. If we think we have problems now with dealing with black and white and red, yellow, and brown and different cultures, different ethnicities, different versions of theology and religion, if that's problematic, you're going to end gray to the mixed or brown or furry brown to the mixed or insectoids. It would be horrible. And see, basically, if this is true, that means the human race has been it could be disenfranchised, and that we have an inconceivable past and an unimaginable future. And that's the problem. And that's why there will never be formal disclosure of the stuff. It won't happen. It can't. It would tear the world apart.
In your August 2013 blog, you wrote there are over 160 types of extraterrestrial beings visiting the Earth. You wrote extensively about the Greys in your book.
Mm-hmm.
In your blog, you mentioned 3 types of Greys: the Nordic blondes and Swedes that look like us but are shorter, and you wrote about the Nordic clones that are controlled by the Greys. What exactly are the Nordic clones?
I mean, if you look into ufology, some of these beings look just like we do. Some are taller with blonde hair and blue eyes. Others are short and hairy with 4 claws and reddish eyes and little bumps on their oily brown skin. There were some cases in the mid to late 1990s of a crash in Brazil where they supposedly captured one or more, and you can look it up online and find it. It's amazing. There's the different types of beings. One is the gray, a tall one, a short one. One is humanoid, like we are, or there's different, and insectoid, and then of course people claim there are reptilians at work, and who knows.
If you want to learn more about Dr. Barry E. Taff's ghostly adventures, please check out his website at www.barrytaff.net. Aliens Above, Ghosts Below is available at numerous online bookstores. I want to thank my special guest, Dr. Barry E. Taff, for explaining ghosts, hauntings, and poltergeists to my listeners. Besides researching homes for radon and mold and the outside soil for heavy metal contaminations, you now have a few new things to look out for when house hunting. For Mothman in the Bible Belt podcast outlet updates, guest bios, and podcast breakdowns, and links to social media, check out my website at mothmaninthebiblebelt.com. Thanks for listening.